My pulse thundered in my ears as I clutched the original contract to my chest, my parents' blissful ignorance painted across their faces. They thought victory was theirs, but the truth lay curled in my fingers, a ticking bomb ready to explode their comfortable illusion. Laughter bounced off the walls, swirling in the air like a mocking chant, a sharp reminder that my own family was plotting behind the veneer of our shared memories. It gnawed at me, that cold betrayal lurking just beneath their grinning faces, staining every tender moment we'd once cherished. They were tearing down, stone by stone, the dream I'd bled for, as if my sacrifice meant nothing. Yet, in the midst of this heartache, a quiet, blistering triumph simmered beneath my skin. They had no idea that I held the key, the contract they overlooked, tucked safely out of sight. It promised a reversal so poetic, their audacity would crumble in the very moment they claimed victory. The room hummed with tension, a silent game played under the guise of civility. I bit back the urge to confront them, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the truth and strip the illusion bare. The room was filled with the clinking of silverware and the smell of roast chicken, a facade of normalcy blanketing the tension that crackled in the air. I sat across from Mom, a delicate smile plastered on her face as she dished mashed potatoes onto my plate. With every scoop, I felt the weight of their deceit press harder against my ribs. "Dad and I have been talking," Mom began, her tone light as the flickering candlelight that cast unsettling shadows across her face. Her words slipped out sweetly, almost as if she were offering me a second helping of dessert rather than betrayal. My stomach churned as I forced a nod of acknowledgement, the steam from the food rising, hot and suffocating, around me. "We've been thinking about how to secure the future of the business," she continued. "You know how much it means to all of us." I focused on slicing my chicken with precision, though my hand trembled slightly under the weight of feigned indifference. They knew what it meant to me, all right. They had seen me scrape and build from the ground up. My heart thumped in erratic rhythm beneath my chest, a wound pulsing just beneath the surface, where rage and disappointment festered like a bruise. Dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms in that authoritative manner that used to command my respect. "We think it's time to bring things into the family fold," he said, the words slick with the artificial warmth of a salesman, pitching what he believed to be an undeniable offer. My gaze flitted between the two of them, searching for even a flicker of the recognition of what they were doing. But all I found were placid faces painted with calculated assurance. My heart sank lower, but I kept the surface of my expression smooth, a practiced facade of compliance. Anger simmered just below my skin, hot and raw, but this wasn't the time for explosions. I had long realized that outright confrontation seldom cracked the veneer of their self-satisfaction. Instead, I let them talk, listened to their careful constructs about unity and collective benefit, while inside, my thoughts spun like a trapped storm, gauging my next move. Any decision made now had to be strategic, not impulsive. "That's an interesting thought," I finally said, controlling my voice to the level of nonchalance their charade deserved. My lips stretched over my teeth in something that resembled a smile. They seemed pleased, mistaking my composure for agreement. Their voices dripped with artificial caring, but all I could focus on was the cold tightness in my chest, knowing they thought themselves clever. As the dinner dragged on, my mind worked through the fog of resentment, outlining potential counters to their proposition, each one silently preparing me for the inevitable showdown. I broke my bread with deliberate slowness, holding off the tremors of fury crawling up my spine. This was far from over. They had underestimated me, and I would use that to my advantage. The room was oppressive, both in its lack of air and its heavy silence, broken only by the scratchy murmur of my father's voice attempting to sound reasonable and the melodic tinkle of my mother's laugh, which failed to mask the greed in her eyes. I sat across from them, nodding as if their words made sense, as if any of this was right, while my mind buzzed with disbelief and anger. Their dining room, with its outdated floral wallpaper and dust-laden chandelier, felt like a theater set, an unfamiliar stage for the grotesque performance unfolding before me. "You know," my mother lilted, her voice like honey laced with arsenic, "we've put so much into helping you succeed. It's only fair we share in the fruits of our labor." Her eyes sparkled with a self-satisfaction that made my stomach twist. My father chimed in, leaning forward as if offering a confidential piece of wisdom. We sacrificed a lot for you. This success, it's as much ours as it is yours. His words were practiced, polished over countless attempts to convince themselves of their righteousness. I nodded slowly, the motion calculated and calm. Inside, a tempest roared. My hands, resting on my knees, itched to clench, to betray the calm exterior I maintained with teeth-gritting effort. Each word they spoke felt like another shovelful, digging deeper into the grave of our relationship. They mistook my calm silence for submission. Little did they know it was the quiet before the storm. I forced myself to stare back at them, my gaze unwavering. As they droned on about the finer points of their misguided plan, I scanned their faces, lines etched from years of stress, ambition, perhaps love, now obscured by avarice. I wondered if they truly believed their own narrative, the one where I owed them, where their role was pivotal instead of peripheral. When you really think about it, my father was saying, voice smooth like the edge of a blade, you're in a position to give back, to show appreciation. As if an obligatory debt existed, signed with the ink of familial duty but void of sincerity. Their entitlement, dressed in the garb of gratitude, was an act of theater I could no longer applaud. I breathed in deeply, the air clawing at my throat like sandpaper. My anger, initially simmering, began to boil over, heating my resolve with its intensity. The thrill of impending vindication, of a storm brewing just over the horizon, gripped me. I could feel the power in my silence, the choice to listen for now before the deluge crashed through their illusion. Their smiles, bright yet brittle, were fixed on me like spotlights demanding a response. I met their gaze with an expression carefully neutral, but let the promise of my coming storm shine through. They continued to prattle on, unaware, their words losing shape and meaning in the march of my intention. I knew something had begun to shift, the balance of power scaling with the weight of unspoken truths. In the quiet of my office, the lines of the contract were more than ink. They were my shield against a betrayal that could have shattered me. I closed the door gently, though the urge to slam it shut pulsed in my fists. The noise of their voices in the living room still lingered, muffled but insistent, like an irritating buzz just beyond my reach. I leaned against the door for a moment, pressing my palms flat against the cool wood, and let out a shakily controlled breath. The familiar warmth of my office wrapped around me, its silent stacks of books and papers a comforting reminder of battles fought and won, many memories etched in the grooves of my well-worn desk. My eyes fell on the contract, the original contract. There it lay, innocuous at first glance, a quiet titan among the chaos outside. I pulled it into my lap reverently. "You're my safeguard," I whispered, reminding myself as much as anything. I let the contract slip through my fingers and began reading. The lawyer's precision in every clause was like a lifeline. My heart pounded, slowly translating my earlier confusion into clarity. They thought I hadn't noticed the sly revisions, the small but potent changes slipped into their proposal. They were banking on my friendship blinding me, banking on foolish trust. Incredibly, I felt a flare of gratitude. Their underestimation might just be my salvation. Though anger rose again, hot like bile, it wasn't the disorienting whirlwind from moments before. It was focused now, like a beam burning away the last remnants of misplaced loyalty. My fingers traced the words, absorbing their power. The office hummed softly around me. Outside, the evening deepened, and the fading sunlight pooled across the floor, casting long shadows. Those shadows seemed alive, twisting and curling as if mirroring my inner turmoil. I inhaled deeply, letting the mingled scents of old books and ink ground me. My mind was a whirl of calculated decisions, each one a realignment of the balance they had dared to disrupt. Strategies for addressing them tomorrow played out in my head, a dark chessboard where each move was critical, each piece painfully personal. I could almost feel the weight of their betrayal pressing down physical, needing to be acknowledged, yet not devastating enough to dislodge the small flicker of resolve growing in its place. I put the contract down, flattening my palms against it, as if pushing the finality of my thoughts into the pages. Protecting myself would be ugly, confronting them uglier. I anticipated the fallout like an approaching storm, uneasy yet necessary. They didn't realize their deception had hardened me, shaped me into something unbreakable. Pushing away from my desk, I I stood straighter, feeling the change solidify within me. I would confront them soon, but not tonight. Tonight, I prepared. Taking one last look at the contract, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would show them who I was, and they would wish they'd never underestimated me. I sat back down at the dinner table, the clinking of cutlery a rhythmic distraction that accompanied my racing thoughts. My stomach twisted, coiled tight with a tension I masked with a practiced smile. Their laughter still echoed, but to me, it was fractured, discordant, a melody hiding malicious intent. So, I began, voice silkier than I felt. How close are you planning to get involved? The question floated across the table, a casual inquiry cloaked in the guise of conversation. Their eyes flickered, a momentary lapse in their otherwise seamless facade. I held their gaze, my smile widening. It was a moment of recognition, a silent admission that this game had multiple players. They exchanged glances, a silent conversation that rattled in the tense air between us. Well, one of them replied, her voice a smooth contradiction to the undercurrents at play. We think it's vital to be involved, you know, deeply. Her words were laced with sweetness, overly so, like sugar masking bitterness. The fork in my hand threatened to reveal my grip's tremble, so I laid it down carefully. The room shrunk, pressing us into the unavoidable confrontation this conversation was bound to become. Deeply, I repeated, nodding as if I were considering an investment opportunity rather than adjudicating their deceit. Could you clarify what deeply entails? A silence stretched, taut, and ready to snap at a word. They shifted in their chair, glancing again at one another, perhaps searching for an anchor, a common story. Well, another voice joined, strained but striving for lightness. It's about commitment. We're committed to seeing this through, you know, for all our sakes. For a moment, my eyes danced over the remnants of our meal, now cold and uninviting. Leftovers of something that once was nourishing but turned unpalatable in the stark light of deception. Their words swam in my mind, murky and false, as I probed deeper. And you're sure that's in everyone's best interest? There was a layer of feigned curiosity in my question, an innocence I no longer believed in. It wasn't about the answer, really. It was about how they delivered the lie. The precision of their fabrications fascinated me now, like watching a magician too closely and spotting the sleight of hand. We believe it is, a third voice added, steadier, almost daring. It was this bravado that both irritated and intrigued me. The audacity of certainty in a person walking a tightrope of deceit. Interesting. I replied softly, letting the word linger, knowing it was the thread that might unravel our delicate dance. Around us, the air seemed to hum, vibrating with undisclosed truths and the promise of what lay ahead. This was far from over, an unending chess match where the next move would decide who truly controlled the board. The taste of impending revelation was bittersweet, an inevitability waiting to unfurl. The door creaked open, and the familiar sound of laughter spilled in, wrapping around the oppressive air like a comforting balm. My siblings, with their bright eyes and animated gestures, all innocence and unknowing, filled the living room. My parents pulled them into warm embraces, their smiles too generous, too rehearsed. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart thudding unevenly against my ribs. Hey, it's been forever, my younger brother exclaimed, throwing his arms around me with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of me. I hugged him back, the ease of his trust a stinging reminder of everything I was about to shatter. My sister bounced over, excitement buzzing around her like a cloud of effervescent energy. You wouldn't believe the stories we picked up on this trip, she said, her eyes wide with exhilaration, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Her happiness was infectious, a light in the gathering storm. Their chatter filled the room with a painful brightness, each story and laugh a testament to the world they believed in. It was a world I wanted so desperately to protect, one my parents' lies threatened to destroy. I caught our mother's eye over my sister's head and held her gaze, a silent battle waging between us. Her expression hardened, a flash of warning that communicated more than words ever could. Let this go? Keep the peace. I looked away first, my resolve quaking beneath the weight of her unspoken command. It sounds like you two had quite the adventure, I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign, tinny, even to my own ears. My siblings laughed, the sound musical and heartbreaking. How could I possibly tell them? How could I not? As the afternoon wore on, I felt the walls closing in around me. My parents, marionettes pulled by strings of their own making, orchestrated a show of normalcy. Their deceit was suffocating, an insidious fog that blurred the line between the truth and the performance they demanded. Do you remember that summer at the lake? My sister asked suddenly, the memory striking me like a physical blow. Those golden days where we were just kids, blissfully unaware of what lay beneath the surface of our perfect family facade. Of course, I said, my voice thick with nostalgia and the bitter taste of reality. Her face softened with affection, and I had to turn away before my own veneer cracked. Their innocent chatter was a painful reminder of everything my parents' plot endangered, including our precious bonds. I felt torn between revealing the rot beneath the surface and letting them remain cocooned in their ignorance, at least a little longer. The truth felt simultaneously liberating and catastrophic. But as my parents steered the conversation toward safer waters, my resolve settled. I knew, before the night was through, the facade could no longer stand. Not like this. We deserve more than shadows and puppeteers. And I deserve to tell them. I leaned back in my chair, trying to project an air of casual curiosity despite the tension coiling tightly in my gut. The conference room reeked of stale coffee and stress, voices blending into a low hum around us. But I stayed fixed on them, the architects of this clandestine takeover, hunched over the table, maps of executive ambition laid bare. Interesting plan, I said, letting the words hang, heavy with deliberate nonchalance. My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral, almost amused. And the legal team? They're confident about this. A flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces. It was slight, barely a crack, but it was enough for me to sense their carefully constructed facade beginning to tremble. I resisted the urge to push too hard, too fast. Instead, I let the silence settle, thickening the air until it was almost suffocating around us. They exchanged glances, a silent communion that spoke volumes of their doubt. We've considered all aspects. One of them finally replied, a touch too defensively. His eyes darted just a bit too quickly for mine. I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at my lips. Considered, sure. But prepared? Legal gray areas can be notoriously sticky, you know? And ethical oversight isn't something you untangle easily once you've crossed that line. I could almost hear their collective inhalation, the room shrinking around the seed of uncertainty I'd just planted. The guy to the right of me shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his shoulders curling inward. This isn't some small-time maneuver. I continued, my voice low and measured, each word a carefully placed marker on the chessboard of this conversation. The whispers eventually turn into questions, and questions into investigations. Has anyone seriously run the numbers on the fallout? Public opinion? Internal chaos? I leaned forward, just enough to let them know I wasn't backing down. Not now. The central figure, sitting directly across from me, looked as if his head had been carved from granite, smooth and impassive. But even granite can be worn down, a lesson he was realizing. We're prepared for any backlash, he insisted. But there it was, the slip. Uncertainty coiled with bravado, barely masking fear. Prepared, I echoed, arching an eyebrow. My every calculation pivoted on this moment, the light touch that could tip them toward introspection, their confident plans fraying along the edges. I hope you're right. But one loose end, and everything unravels. Not all your ducks seem to be in a row. I studied them, feeling the balance of power shift, subtle but unmistakable, a tide turning. There was a pause, a heavy silence pregnant with the weight of what was unsaid. And just then, I knew they weren't just battling me, but perhaps the first whispers of their own conscience. As the moment lingered, their previously unwavering certitude crumbled, ever so slightly, as doubt began its slow, relentless creep through their collective resolve. I stepped into the hallway, the din of the room fading as I pulled the door shut behind me. The thin pretext of a necessary phone call hung in the air like an invisible curtain, granting me a momentary escape. I paused, pressed against the cool wall, letting my breath steady and the racing thoughts quiet into a focused hum. The shadows of the evening stretched long across the floor, the dim light from a solitary bulb above casting everything in a muted sheen. It felt like the world had slowed down just for me, giving me space to navigate this tightrope with absolute precision. I pivoted towards the low bookshelf, where I'd methodically organized everything that mattered, my arsenal, my truth. With each drawer open, the whisper of paper against paper was a comforting symphony. My fingers grazed the crisp edges of documents, each one a testament to my story, pieces that others may have overlooked or underestimated in their arrogance. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought wrong. Each rustle of paper felt like a promise that my story was far from over. I had armor, and they couldn't see it. Beneath the dull overhead light, I sifted through pages, seizing on key documents that were to become the load-bearing beams of my defense. Spreadsheets, contracts, emails, each one slid into a sturdy folder, fortifying my case with facts and truths that could not be denied, regardless of their dismissive posturing. The weight of it was gratifying, tactile evidence of my diligence. A soft rhythm, that of my fingertips drumming against the wooden table, matched the steady beat of my heart as I committed every strategic piece to muscle memory. It was calming, in an odd sense, like scripting a masterpiece in an otherwise chaotic canvas. This was my focus: precision, preparation, the unwavering discipline of outmaneuvering those who'd underestimated me. From the hallway, the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation seeped through the door, a reminder of the opposition inside. Their voices were carefree, almost mocking in their ignorance. In their arrogance, they had laid out their assumptions, believing them unassailable. I allowed a small, determined smile to play on my lips. Let them bask in their illusion. I had my truth, my unyielding fragments of reality, meticulously pieced together against their bravado. Winding through the tight passage, a frictionless glide of anticipation, I sensed something shifting inside. This wasn't fear steering me. It was the thrill of staking my claim in a battle covertly waged. I'll see it through, I thought, as the click of the door handle echoed softly in the hushed hallway. With the folder of truths clutched to my chest, I re-entered the room, my expression composed, purposeful. They hadn't seen the last of me yet, not by a long shot. The room seemed to shrink, each tick of the grandmother clock on the mantel louder, more insistent than the last. I watched the flicker of the candlelight dance across the porcelain faces seated around the dining table. My parents were lost in easy laughter, forks clinking against dessert plates. The moment felt surreal, as if the world had been drawn with sharper edges than usual, each detail etched into my mind with precise clarity. I held the contract close to my chest, its paper cool and clinical, a stark contrast to the warmth of my skin, flushed with adrenaline. My breaths were steady, but beneath the veneer of calm, my heart raced, pounding a relentless rhythm. I could feel the ghost of a smile pulling at my lips, the taste of victory almost tangible now. Dessert, some decadent chocolate creation, lay half-eaten before me. The sweetness lingered bitterly, one final pretense in a meal filled with them. A lull in conversation was my cue. I took my chance, lifting my eyes to meet theirs, bracing myself for the uproar. "There's something I'd like to discuss," I began, letting the words ride out on an exhale, my voice surprisingly even. As they turned to face me, their expressions shifted from indulgent to curious, then, slowly, as I slid the contract across, to stupefied. The original agreement lay bare upon the table, the inked words a reminder, a promise unfulfilled. The sudden silence was profound, the sound of their forks clattering to their plates nearly deafening. My mother's eyes flicked over the document, understanding dawning like the creeping glow of an unwelcome sunrise. My father's confident facade fractured under the weight of realization. There was a triumphant rush within me, an indefinable satisfaction at this reversal. Years of feeling caged, maneuvered as if I were a pawn on their chessboard, coalesced into this singular moment. The unyielding nature of paper, binding and succinct, a contract that promised too much and yet was damning in its simplicity. My mother's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She seemed to wrestle with the implications, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the edge of the document. My father, ever the picture of authority, sat still, a statue of disbelief. His brows knitted, preparing to dismiss me, to counter, but in his eyes, I saw the falter, the hesitation. A chink in his armor that had remained unyielding for too long. "What is this?" he finally sputtered, his voice a shadow of its usual booming timbre. I let silence drape over us again, luxuriating in it, The control as intoxicating as it was rare. Just a reminder, I offered, my voice steady, echoing the quiet strength I had gathered. Their world, once unassailable, showed its cracks, its fragility laid bare for both of us to see. The balance shifted, imperceptible at first, but unmistakable in its progression. And in this power shift, in their faltering, I found something akin to peace, knowing the next move was finally mine to make. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls pressing closer with the dense silence that had settled in. I could hear every subtle shift of the old wooden floor beneath us, the softest creak that punctuated the air as if the house itself were holding its breath, unwilling to disrupt the fragile stillness. My parents sat across from me, their faces an unreadable canvas, an unsettling blend of shock and something akin to fear. Their eyes avoided mine, darting between the framed photos on the mantel, as if seeking solace in frozen memories of happier times. I said nothing, choosing to let the weight of it all sink in. The truth had been laid bare, each moment extending into eternity, amplifying their realization of what their actions had unraveled. The web of deceit they had crafted, whether from desperation or greed, was now in tatters at their feet. The air felt charged, heavy with the unspoken truths and disappointed hopes that hovered between us like specters. There was no need for words. My silence was enough, echoing louder than any admonition could. I watched them grapple with their emotions, the discomfort building as my eyes stayed firmly on theirs, unyielding. In their faces, I saw the stages of their understanding. Denial first, a flicker that had since dissipated, making way for the grip of reality that left them empty, deflated. They had planned, plotted, and in their minds, secured a future, one that now lay crumbled in the light of day. I felt a strange sense of triumph, not the gloating satisfaction one might expect, but a profound relief, deep and unwavering. There's a power in truth that doesn't need loud proclamations or vindictive triumphs. It stands firm, unwavering, and silent. I felt composed, even with the adrenaline that coursed beneath my skin. The embodiment of justice served quietly. And now, all that was left was the aftermath, the fragments of trust that once existed too broken to repair. I knew this would change us fundamentally, though in ways I couldn't yet predict. There was pain in that knowledge, but with it, the closing door to an unwanted chapter, a step towards something unknown, but likely better. They were finally seeing the repercussions of choices made in secrecy, the unraveling strands of their intentions now exposed to unforgiving light. Their voices broke the silence only to murmur confused apologies, though none could turn back time or soften the hardness that settled in my chest. With each heartbeat, each inhalation, I sensed the distance growing between us, a landscape of decisions and consequences. The victory didn't feel as sweet as I imagined. It was tempered by loss, and yet, fittingly absolute. I stood to leave then, their muted pleas following me, to talk, to repair, but the wrongs leveled out in stark silence and genuine resolve. As I walked out, I understood. Victory sometimes looks like walking away, head held high, with nothing more than the truth on your side. I found myself standing there in the dim light of dawn, staring into the bathroom mirror. The reflection was tired, hair's askew, eyes a little red, but my face, it was my face. Not the face of someone beaten down by life's cruel games, but of someone who had weathered a storm and come out the other side. In the mirror's reflection, I saw not a victim of betrayal, but a survivor of it, forging ahead with my dreams intact. The quiet of the morning felt heavy, like the calm after a thunderstorm. As I leaned against the sink, the memories of the past few weeks played through my mind like an old film reel, flickering and occasional. My brother's voice, the sharp edge of his words when I confronted him, still echoed occasionally, but the outrage was giving way to something more like acceptance. It was a complicated family picture, a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit as perfectly as I once imagined. I turned away from the mirror and walked into the living room. The sparse furniture, reminders of a life built around necessities, seemed both comforting and lonesome at that moment. Each piece was testament to nights of planning, of sacrifices made, and dreams grasped firmly despite the odds. This was my space. My business, untouched and uncompromised, stood as evidence of that. The weight of family expectations hung over me like a shadow, but not the dark kind. It was a reminder that, even in the fractures, there were points of light. Forgiveness didn't come easily, if it came at all. But understanding, that was something I could manage. There was still love there, beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal. It wasn't the fierce kind that flared up and faded quickly, but the sort that endures, reshaping itself as needed. I remembered the sound of my mother's voice, weary yet hopeful, as she encouraged me to find the courage to keep the ties that bind without letting them suffocate. And that was the line I walked now, balancing trust and vigilance, love and independence. The plan for the day lay sketched out in my mind. Meetings, follow-ups, decisions to be made. Life had a way of moving relentlessly forward, demanding action, offering little time for retrospection. But in the silence of my own thoughts, I resolved to steer my own course, one step at a time. The path was uncertain, yes, but it was unmistakably mine. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the window, brushing the room in a gentle gold, I felt a sense of quiet determination. There was still work to be done, goals to strive for, and yes, family to face in time. But there was also strength in knowing that the foundation beneath my feet was solid, even if the walls needed a little repair. I would build, mend, and move ahead because that's what survivors do.